It's great to have Vodacom Business at the My Broadband Cloud Conference 2021, and I'm really excited to be talking to our next guest today. We're going to be talking about all sorts of things relating to the cloud. Garith Peck is the Executive Head of Security, Cloud Hosting and Security Business Solutions at Vodacom Business. And this is a very interesting topic because, we've seen so many vulnerabilities. We talk about work from home. We talk about, the world being a cloud world. But security is probably the Achilles heel when it comes to this environment which we're in at the moment. So, Garith, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to the conference. Am I wrong in saying that cloud security is relevant and is probably the Achilles heel when it comes to the environment we're working on?
Thank you very much, Akin. It's really a pleasure to be speaking with you. So, if you look at security holistically, the topic of security is probably the most topical conversation in any technological engagement, from a customer right down to the individual at home. Cloud security is no exception to this. We're looking at the barrage of breaches that's been happening over the last few months, just locally here in South Africa. This is a clear indication as to the importance of security. So the relevance of cloud security takes it to the next level. Cloud security is critical because most organizations are really using cloud computing in one form or the other. So it really has a high rate of adoption. So public cloud services has been increasing from a growth perspective. This has been shown by analysts like Gartner, where they said in 2020, there's been a big growth in mainstream adoption of cloud. But as companies move towards the cloud, the concern is always around the data and the applications. And the big challenge that happens is, from an IT perspective, the security personnel, they have concerns around the governance, compliance issues, how the content is stored in the cloud. So they worry about, the high sensitivity of information, the possibility of accidental leaks, or anything that could happen from an increasing sophisticated cyber attack. Now, the crucial component of cloud security is the focus on how it's protecting data, business content, as well as its customers. So preventing data leaks and theft is really critical to maintaining customers' trust, as well as for protecting their own assets and while giving people their own competitive advantage. So maintaining a real strong security posture, cloud security posture, really will help organizations to address and see the benefits of cloud computing, because the benefits is clear, right? They want to see lower upfront costs. They want to see reduced ongoing operational administrative costs, ease of scaling, increased reliability and availability. This is the new way of working.
Garith, what are those common security challenges that customers are facing across the different cloud services? I bet you've seen some really interesting things over the last 18 months.
Yeah, for me, a couple of standout things would be simple things like incompatibilities. Now, incompatibilities create management and security shortfalls. So what I'm actually referring to here is IT tools architected for the legacy on-premise environments. They're incompatible with cloud environments or virtualization. Now, these incompatibilities, they would typically translate into visibility or control gaps that expose organizations to risks from things like misconfigurations, vulnerabilities, data leakage, excessive privilege access, which is a massive issue when it comes to breaches for many organizations. So cloud platforms themselves, they may lack adequate native security capabilities, like things like session monitoring for auditing. So additionally, different cloud environments may be comprised of building blocks like hypervisors, your operating systems, your storage. So the security process or technology suitable for one cloud may not be portable across a heterogeneous cloud environment. Another challenge that I see is multi-tenancy, and it may not stand out as a security issue, but multi-tenancy tends to muddy the traditional boundaries. So while multi-tenancy from a cloud environment is the backbone for many of the benefits around cloud computing, like shared resources to lower costs, flexibility, etc., it introduces concerns from a security perspective, like data isolation, data privacy. So those are things that people are considered as well. One additional thing that people don't probably think about when it comes to security is simple errors that can cause massive damage. Now, the rapid scalability is a prime benefit of cloud computing, we can all agree. But the flip side is vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, other security issues that proliferate at a rapid speed and scale. So, and this can result in a really wide scale outage. Now, the example I can use for this is something like from an AWS or Office 365 perspective. If you look at the administrator console, it has super user capabilities. Now, this enables the administrator to be able to efficiently provision, configure, and manage delete servers at a massive scale. So they're dealing with hundreds or thousands of servers at a time. Now think about a mistake or a configuration error, how that would proliferate across an entire estate. So that's some challenges. I think one big challenge, which is notable in the market, and you'll see from a cloud security perspective, most of the industry is leaning towards this, that the security around cloud is focused around the identity. It's much more identity centric, because it's around the keys to the kingdom, because many cloud applications have embedded default credentials. And organizations, they need to be able to manage these credentials. So having a real mature privilege management solution to take away the keys to the kingdom that these administrators have, because this is a massive attack vector that is being exploited on a daily basis.
Wow, it's actually frightening the way you've laid it out. But I guess that the fact that you know these vulnerabilities exist, and at Vodacom Business, you're protecting your users against these kind of things. So it's great that you know what's out there so you can prevent it from happening. I mean, when you look at the principal risks that cloud security protects against, what would those be?
Yeah, I mean, the principal risks, I mean, if I think about what it prevents, the first thing that stands out for me is lack of control. So the lack of control, so using public cloud service means that an organization no longer effectively, they're effectively renting IT assets. So they no longer have ownership of hardware, applications, or software, anything like that. So instead, they're leasing IT services. So a holistic security approach will ensure that the appropriate steps is in place so that the cloud vendor can be able to manage these assets. Lack of visibility as well. So cloud computing makes it easy for everyone to subscribe to a SaaS application, and spin up new instances. But what also happens is these are also types of shadow IT that may occur outside of the view or the control of your security policies. So there needs to be acceptable use policies with regards to how cloud services are introduced into organizations. Again, identity management is the center point of this, ensuring that only authorized users have access to cloud environments, making sure that the users only having access to the data and applications to the role that they're doing within their job. Malware, cloud environments typically have strong anti-malware protections and security measures, but that doesn't mean that it satisfies an acceptable risk profile criteria for organizations. I always maintain that there's no silver bullet for cybersecurity. Organizations, whether it is on cloud, whether it is on premise, you need to have a layered security methodology and a layered security approach, because threats happen on multiple vectors. And these vectors are changing on a daily basis. So privileges is something that's really big, like I mentioned previously. So whether it is through malevolence or just simple negligence, one of the big challenges we have around the insider threats is that insider threats are something like an administrator, a developer, a power user, or even a trusted third party. All of these are mechanisms that can be exploited as well. So the privileges, the keys to the kingdom, needs to be secured.
I like the way you said the keys to the kingdom, and I automatically thought of my house, right? I mean, do you know who's got the keys to your house, or who's got the remotes to open the gate to your home, right? I mean, those are.
I'd like to hone in on that analogy, Aki, because If you look at the analogy of a South African home, and I'm using the term South African home because I use this analogy overseas and nobody could understand it because nobody has the high walls that we have here in South Africa. But if you look at the analogy, right, we have these massive walls, and if you're living in a gated community, you have a security guard. Behind that, you will have beams or you'll have a dog. And then you'll get to the house, you'll have the gate. And then behind the gate, you'll have the mother-in-law. Behind the mother-in-law, you'll have maybe CCTV cameras, those kind of things. So that's like a layered security approach, right? And this is kind of the same thought process that needs to be approached when you adopting a security methodology in any, whether it is on-premise or whether it is in the cloud. You need to have layers of security. Who has the keys to the door? Who has the code to the ADT alarm system? It's all of those kind of things. I wanted to just hone in on that analogy because it was something that I refer to a lot.
Well, I absolutely love it because it's really made me more aware, and I love the analogy that you've used of all the different layers because it's really important to look at it from that point of view. Now, Garith, what best practices can be used for implementing strong cloud security, the kind of stuff that we've been talking about? What do you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of best practices, but a few things that I can maybe just point out to, like a security 101, network segmentation. So in multi-tenant cloud environments, you need to be able to assess the segmentation between the resources, between your own resources and your customer resources. And those instances, you need to be able to leverage a zone approach to isolate instances, containers, applications, and so on. A big thing from a best practice perspective, and there's a big drive around this, is around SIEM technologies. So security information and event management systems. So this provides organizations with a holistic view of information security. So all the logs from vulnerability management solutions, from your ITSM solutions, from your privilege management solutions, all feed into this SOC SIEM capability that organizations need to be able to have a nice control over, to see exactly where the reporting and the holes are in the environment. Again, I'm going to labor the point of access management and identity management, and just to take that a step further, things like enforcing least privilege to restrict access to hardened cloud resources. So for instance, you can only expose resources to the internet that as and when is required, not all the time. So ensure that the privileges are role-based and that privilege access is audited and recorded via session monitoring. Because if we go back to the keys to the kingdom, if you're having an administrator that's working on the system, you need to be able to have a session recording to see what actions he's taking because of how important that privilege access is and how much damage that can do specifically to an organization. So there are a lot of best practices, Aki. So things like, password control. This is like out of the box, security 101, vulnerability management, patching and maintenance. You'd be surprised how bad some organizations are when it comes to just maintaining and patching the environments. But from a cloud perspective, you need to ensure that the cloud vendor has a reliable approach to patch vulnerabilities. So, to be proactive in scanning and patching for vulnerabilities across your own infrastructure is important. Encryption, Aki, I mean, that's security 101.
Yes.
Data must be encrypted at rest or in transit. So I think those are the top of mind kind of best practices that I can put. Disaster recovery, monitoring, there's a whole lot that we can spend a lot of time talking about.
But isn't it amazing, whenever you've heard of the vulnerabilities that have taken place up to now, how many of the times something like a patch wasn't done, and that allowed for that vulnerability to take place. So patches, I couldn't agree with you more, are so critical. How important is it to have a cybersecurity culture, right? Because I guess that we can talk about all of these things until we blue in the face. But if you haven't got the culture within your team there, and that cybersecurity culture that's always in changing the way we think, if you haven't got that in place, I mean, everything else you can throw away, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, security has to start from the top. So from the boardroom right through to the basement, and now in the new world, taking it home because now we're all working from home. So security culture is really important because people tend to forget, security is not an IT problem. right? And it's not the CIO's problem, it's an organizational problem. And one of the best ways that organizations can reduce the cyber risk is by building this culture. So this entails creating a mindset for employees to be able to know exactly and assess the risks that will impact both them and the organization. So like the cybersecurity culture is important because it goes further than just protecting the hardware data. It also protects the individual as well. Because remember, the same habits that we pick up at work, we can enforce this at home. You know, the bad habits of just accepting an email from an uncle that's giving you 5 million inheritance from Nigeria, and some people are still falling for that those links and opening up ransomware
Yes.
links. So a security culture is important. Now, what's happening is organizations need to share with all the people within in the companies, because the news is littered with how organizations are being breached. I mean, 90% of cyber attacks are caused by human error or human behavior. You know, an organization is more likely to be compromised by an employee that lost his laptop or lost his cell phone or done something as plugging in a flash drive that they picked up from the floor. You know, these are kind of behaviors that you need to educate, and there's constant training that needs to happen with all the employees, so they can understand the ramifications of what happens when they're not careful. I mean, the added thing is, when we are now working from home, what happens is people also working from home are now working in a much more relaxed manner, and they tend to drop their cybersecurity guard. So people are also using their own personal devices as well. So
Yes.
there are a lot of learnings that the organization can instill. I mean, some organizations found it to be a bit of a challenge because they didn't see how they would spend millions and millions on technology and on hardware and on software, but they wouldn't spend anything to educate the employees. And some employees didn't see the benefit of this. But if you really delve down into it, and you see, if you start educating people and you address that 90% of that people that's clicking on that link, you'll definitely find a return on that investment, because you created this culture, this awareness where you in the IT term, we use the term zero trust a lot.
Yes.
From a security perspective. But zero trust is something that you can use from a personal perspective as well, because it's now trust no one and verify first. You know what I mean? The old way of they called it the castle and moat approach, where you trust everyone inside and you trust nobody on the outside. Those days are gone. It has to be zero trust. It has to be a culture across the entire organization.
Can you share some of those trends that you're seeing, and the security predictions for the cybersecurity market? And I imagine that things have changed quite significantly in the last 18 months. But where is it going? Is it settling down? Are you seeing stuff that is unexpected, for example? What are the trends that you're seeing?
Well, I mean, the number one trend that we're seeing that's glaring in our faces is these targeted ransomware attacks. I mean, these are really increasing on a rapid scale. But noticeably, from a trend perspective, what is being picked up is in the ransomware world, there's something called double extortion. So the hacker group first demands money for the ransom for decrypting the files, but now they're coming back and they're saying, well, we want second payment to prevent us from releasing the data online. So, and in addition, there's something called ransomware as a service that has also sprung up. What has happened is these threat actors, they're all sharing their ransomware code or anything like that, and they're allowing inexperienced attackers to start using this malicious code to start being opportunists and try and hack as well. So where they actually get paid dividends on the money that they make out of these ransomware attacks. And
Crazy.
due to this, we believe that this ransomware will continue to rage on, in the foreseeable future. I mean, one big trend, obviously, is the remote working. Nobody 2 years ago would have predicted the world that we're living in right now. There's a seismic shift into how we're working from a remote perspective. And like I mentioned, how people are dropping their guard, the laxness of working from home, it's an impact as well. And it's a notable vector that's being exploited by many of these threat actors. Supply chain attacks is becoming much more frequent as well. And then also one big thing is, from a trend perspective, is OT systems, like the SCADA systems, the industrial systems. These have become really big targets because traditionally these systems run on legacy platforms. They run on old, operating systems, and they were always managed separately away from your traditional IT. But now what has happened is the new world of OT is now a connected world. So a connected world now brings now added risks now, and these are being exploited. If we look back at a breach that has happened a few months ago at that water filtration plant in the US, yeah, that was an OT system that was exploited. But the scariest part about that was the breach wasn't for any personal identifiable information that was trying to be stolen or anything like that. These threat actors were trying to change the formula for palatable water. So, I mean, the idea of that just blows your mind, because the ramifications of that is poisoning an entire populace. I mean, they were trying to change the formula on sodium hydroxide because that's just used to kill bacteria in small quantities as part of the filtration process. They were upping the dosage of that. But fortunately, that breach was stopped. But I mean, that just gives you an example. Many of these breaches are happening from this level. HVAC systems, CCBT, because a lot of these old OT systems have hard-coded default passwords that's embedded in those systems, and it gets exploited. I think one thing that also stands out, which is on the rise as well, is cyber insurance. So cyber insurance is something that stands out because many organizations are taking out cyber insurance, but there's a different spin on this whole cyber insurance, because some countries and some organizations is becoming mandatory, but the cyber criminals are kind of rejoicing, if you think about it, because as the volume and costs breaches are increasing, so organizations, they're taking out this comprehensive cyber insurance to reduce their contractual risks. Now, naturally, these cyber attackers will start honing in on those big companies that has these cyber insurances, because cyber criminals will target those brands because there's a higher chance of them being paid from an insurance perspective than that company being forced to pay out on a policy to cover a remedial action.
Right.
So there's a flip side to cyber insurance. There's a big thought around not paying ransomware, and I'm in full agreement of that, because you pay, the more you pay, the more they come back. It's the same kind of scenario. And I think probably the last trend that I'll probably hone in on is AI. So artificial intelligence is a big trend. But again, like the cyber insurance, both from a positive and from a negative perspective, because like the good guys, we're using AI from a cybersecurity perspective, having best of breed solutions to be able to have machine learning abilities to pick up all these vulnerabilities and threats and so on. The threat actors are doing the same.
Yeah, look, I'm glad you raised AI, because you're hearing the artificial intelligence in security used quite frequently over here. Yeah. Is AI? I mean, can AI work as a solution, for example?
No, definitely, because I mean, AI. I mean, if you look at the large scale of information that gets processed, AI is definitely that ability to be able to close that gap. One big challenge you have in the security world is skills. There's a notable skills shortage across the world. It's not limited only to an Africa context. Worldwide, there's a massive shortage of security skills. AI can bridge those gaps. But like AI, the machine learning abilities to be able to train and accelerate, your adoption of security. Like I mentioned, the flip side of that is it can also be used because the threat actors also have their own versions of their own AI or machine learning, where they're using that to learn from their own breaches, and where they can start honing in on specific targets with fewer vulnerabilities to try and evade tools. So it's a constant cat and mouse situation.
Absolutely fascinating, and a very complex world that we're living in. I'm so glad that I spoke to you, and you've highlighted the security dangers so eloquently. And I want to thank Vodacom Business for joining us at this year's My Broadband Cloud Conference. Garith Peck, who is the Executive Head of Security, Cloud Hosting, and a whole host of other security issues, business solutions at Vodacom. And Vodacom Business, thank you so much for joining us at this year's My Broadband Cloud Conference. We really appreciate your time and your insights, Garith.
Thank you so much, Aki.